Welcome to CivilNet. My guest joining me from New York is Michael Bobelian. He is a journalist, a lawyer, an author, and a grandson of survivors of the Armenian Genocide. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
A number of years ago, in 2009 actually, you wrote a book called Children of Armenia, A Forgotten Genocide and the Century-Long Struggle for Justice. It has now been 100 years since the first genocide of the 20th century, the Armenian Genocide. And my first question to you, at the time the world knew about it, the New York Times wrote hundreds, if not thousands of articles about it. Europe knew what was going on, the United States knew what was going on, but something happened and somehow it was forgotten. I'm curious, is that what motivated you to write the book?
That was part of what motivated me. I wanted to know, every April growing up, you hear about the genocide as an Armenian, and I wanted to know how we got to where we got, why we have the demonstrations or public commemorations, how did we get there? And when I started to explore the issue time, up to 1965 basically, there were no public commemorations of the genocide, or very few. And that got me even more interested, and that's what led to the book, in that I wanted to answer a lot of the mysteries of how the Armenian world, and not just Armenia and the diaspora, but all of the Armenian world, had gotten to where it had when it came to the genocide. And that forgetfulness was a big part of the story.
Yeah, and the 50th anniversary in 1965 was a real watershed. Demonstrations taking place in the Soviet Union, in Soviet Armenia. You write about that in your book. What is it that triggered? What was it that triggered that movement that really sort of shook the diaspora up too?
Right. Well, so let me go a little bit further back first. What happened was there was a lot of knowledge and interest about the genocide and what happened to the Armenians during World War I and immediately following World War I. A lot of that interest was driven by Western Europe and the United States, the victors of the First World War. And then by the mid-20s, they moved on to other issues. The Treaty of Lausanne, signed with Turkey in 1923, didn't mention the Armenians, and the world moved on. And the Armenians were incapable of sustaining the memory of the genocide with the outside world. And that was due in part because they didn't have a homeland, and the diaspora was spread out across the world, and it was a generation that was rebuilding. So you have a generation of widows and orphans, right? The leaders of the Armenian world had been eliminated by the Young Turks, and even the communities had to be rebuilt. So you have all these reasons that conspired to keep the Armenians silent up to 1965. Now, as we approach the 50th anniversary, a couple of things had changed. In the diaspora, you have now a second generation of Armenian Americans, French Armenians, etc., and they have gone past the rebuilding stage. They have built their communities, they have rebuilt their families, and they were more prepared and had the strength and the wherewithal to start mounting some kind of political or public campaign to resurrect the genocide. And then in the Soviet Armenia, that was the sort of the early start of Armenian nationalism. And if you look at the scholarship, it'll show you that a lot of Armenian nationalism that really came to fruition in the mid to late 1980s was born out of that 1965 demonstration. And part of that was not just due to Armenian nationalism, but it was also due to changes in the Soviet Union, where the central power and the central control certainly wasn't as tight as it was under Joseph Stalin. And so the 50th anniversary, kind of all these changes came to fruition, and Armenians across the world finally stood up and reminded the world of the genocide. And what's interesting is that up until the final days of the Soviet Union, let's say until the late 1980s, that demonstration in Yerevan in 1965 was the biggest demonstration in Soviet history.
Yeah, it was incredible. We were at the National Archives looking at some of the photos that exist from that time. And it really propelled the Armenian question onto an international scene because the diaspora, as you said, sort of woke up from its forbearance. And you know, this past month, in the month of April, a lot of very interesting things started to happen. You know, it was the 100th anniversary, and we said, well, it's just a number. What's really going to change? But it seemed that the narrative has shifted. Here in Armenia especially, we saw this almost a renaissance taking place, understanding that it's a new Armenia, it's a new century. But the 50th anniversary, is it fair to say that it really laid the groundwork for what came and what led to the 100th anniversary?
Absolutely. And that's when the April 24th demonstrations began. That's when all these legislative battles across the world, and a lot of that took place here in the United States, as Armenian American advocates tried to have Congress pass resolutions that recognized or acknowledged the genocide. And the 50th anniversary was the awakening. The challenge that Armenians faced across the world was twofold. First, a lot of the world had forgotten what had happened during World War I. And that's why oftentimes the genocide is called the Forgotten Genocide. So Armenians had to overcome a huge roadblock of re-educating the world of what had taken place. And then second, that's when they really confronted Turkish denial head on. Turkey had been denying the genocide since it was taking place, and certainly by the 1920s and 30s. But because Armenians rarely spoke about it, because the rest of the world didn't really think about it, Turkey didn't have to actively do much up until the mid-60s. So now you have not only this world that is ignorant and indifferent to the fate of the Armenians, but you're now facing Turkish denial head on. Now, as Armenians started to make more noise, more demonstrations, more legislative efforts, and then there were a series of Armenian attacks against Turkish diplomats. So as Armenians started to bring more attention to the genocide, Turkey increased its efforts of denial. And it did that through false scholarship, it did that through lobbying, and it did that through other means as well, trying to reach the media and certainly foreign governments across the world. So that basically intensified the dispute between Armenians and Turks, and that dispute has continued pretty much the same way for the past 50 years.
Yeah, but you know, as we are now in the 100th year, we do see changes taking place in Turkish society, in certain sectors of Turkish society. Today, you can say the word genocide in Istanbul. In the eastern provinces, perhaps not so much. So for the Armenians, as we are now into the 101st year, what are the challenges now? I mean, are we responsible for educating Turkish society as we were responsible for educating the world?
That's a great question, and one that is not easy to answer because we almost have to decide collectively. And obviously, if for a country that would be difficult, but for a people spread across the world with a mother country as well as a diaspora, it's even harder. I think what is important is the changes made in Turkey that, as you just mentioned, have taken place because of external pressure, as well as because of internal changes. And as younger Turks, more educated Turks see this issue, more and more they're coming to realize that, yes, there was a genocide, or at the least, they are willing to look into it. They are willing to have an open mind about it. I think Armenians encouraging that kind of mindset in Turkey will be very healthy. At the same time, Armenians also have to wonder, is this how we want to keep spending our energy? Is this what we want to keep focusing on as a people or as a nation in regards to Armenia? And that's a fair question that we have to answer, and then we have to start thinking about is, are there other things that we could be concentrating on and not maybe pursue genocide recognition the way we have pursued it the last 50 years, maybe find a new way of pursuing it by focusing more on Turkish society rather than sort of the battlegrounds that have taken place throughout the world. But that's a great question that I think now that the 100th anniversary has come and gone, people will start thinking about that. Should we be pursuing justice the same way? And should we be pursuing it with the same energy and intensity? Or are there other things of concern to Armenians across the world, directing our energy to.
Yeah, and you led right into my final question, and you presented it in a way that I wanted to ask it to you. But there has been a lot of talk. There's a lot of discourse now. We are not always united in how we want to see the future of Armenia, of the nation, of the Republic of Armenia. But in your opinion, how important is it to ensure the empowerment of the Republic of Armenia as sort of the legal representative of the Armenian nation? It has recognized borders, it has a seat at the United Nations, it is an independent country. How important is it for the institutions of democracy in Armenia to flourish, to become a socially just country, in future sort of policies, in continuing to seek recognition? Is that something that we should be, as a nation, focusing our energy on, in your opinion?
Well, Armenia has a lot of things to worry about. In the diaspora, Armenians, when they participate in Armenian life, the genocide and genocide recognition is one of the things they do. But Armenia has problems of governance, it has economic problems like all other countries, environmental problems, you name it. And it has to focus its interests and its energy on all of those things. But a strong Armenia, meaning economically strong, militarily capable of defending itself, and most importantly, a strong human rights and democratic record, is probably the most important thing for Armenia. Now, as for how Armenia and the diaspora can work together when it comes to the genocide issue, that's very tricky. If take this hypothetical, if Turkey came tomorrow and said, look, we're going to send 5 diplomats to Geneva, and we're going to negotiate reparations and recognition and things like that, you, the Armenian world, send us 5 people to represent your interests. It would take us years just to figure out what to do and who to send. And that's something that we need to work on between the diaspora and Armenia. Who's going to lead that effort? How is it going to be coordinated? Because if Armenia does it unilaterally, it will not gain the support of the diaspora. At the same time, the diaspora is spread out. It's not as organized. So Armenia needs to lead, but it needs to also include and coordinate the diaspora in any such kind of negotiation or discussion with Turkey when it comes to the genocide.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for the enlightening conversation, for the very valid points that you placed, and something for all of us to think about moving forward.
Thank you.
I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest was Michael Bobelian. He is a lawyer, journalist, author, and a grandson of survivors of the Armenian Genocide who joined us via Skype from New York. Keep following CivilNet.